Hi, thanks for watching BibleMountain.com. In this video we're going to read from Exodus 36 and talk about whether or not our church buildings should be expensive. The context of chapter 36 is the Israelites are at Mount Sinai and they're building the tabernacle. In previous verses we read about the Israelites making the coverings that would cover the tabernacle. If you remember, there were 4 layers to the covering. In these verses we're going to read about them making the frames that formed the tabernacle itself. So let's get started in verse 20. Then he made the boards for the tabernacle of acacia wood, standing upright. 10 cubits was the length of each board, and 1.5 cubits the width of each board. Okay, so we see that the frame was made of boards. Each board was about 10 cubits long. A cubit is about 18 inches, so that means each board was about 15 feet long. The boards were standing upright, so that tells us the tabernacle was about 15 feet tall. Now, just for context, if you walk into a typical house, the ceiling of each floor is about 8 or 9 feet tall. And so we see that this tabernacle was not quite twice as tall as a typical room in a typical house. Verse 22. There were 2 tenons for each board, fitted to one another. Thus he did for all the boards of the tabernacle. He made the boards for the tabernacle, 20 boards for the south side. So we see there was 20 boards on the south side. Each board was about 2 feet wide, so that means the overall length of this tabernacle was about 40 feet. And again, for context, your typical 2,000 square foot house is roughly about 40 feet long. Verse 24. He made 40 sockets of silver under the 20 boards, 2 sockets under one board for its 2 tenons, and 2 sockets under another board for its 2 tenons. Now notice in verse 24 the word silver. He made sockets of silver for each of these boards to sit on. Now, silver is not highly expensive, but it is a precious metal, and so there is some value to it. And so right here we see that they are investing some precious metals in the building of this tabernacle. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. Verse 25. Then for the second side of the tabernacle, on the north side, he made 20 boards, and there are 40 sockets of silver, 2 sockets under one board and 2 sockets under another board. For the rear of the tabernacle to the west, he made 6 boards. He made 2 boards for the corners of the tabernacle at the rear. They were double beneath, and together they were complete to the top to the first ring. Thus he did with both of them for the 2 corners. There were 8 boards with their sockets of silver, 16 sockets, 2 under every board. So here we see that the tabernacle was about 15 feet wide. So 40 feet long, 15 feet wide. Verse 31. Then he made bars of acacia wood, 5 for the boards of one side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the boards of the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the boards of the tabernacle for the rear side to the west. He made the middle bar to pass through in the center of the boards from end to end. So here we see that he made some bars, a total of 15. The purpose of the bars was to join all these boards together so that they formed one unit. Verse 34. He overlaid the boards with gold, and made their rings of gold as holders for the bars, and overlaid the bars with gold. So we talked a little bit earlier, they had silver in this tabernacle. Here we see that they overlaid all these boards with gold. Now again, these boards formed a room that was about 15 feet high, 15 feet wide, and 40 feet long. That's a lot of space, and all of those boards were covered with gold. So that is a lot of gold. Now imagine walking into a typical 2,000 square foot house, and on the first floor, half of the walls are covered with gold. That gives you a little bit of perspective on how much gold went into building this tabernacle. Now we're going to come back to this, but let me give you something to think about a while. One of the ways to learn what something is to learn what something isn't. And we learn a lot about 21st century Christianity by reading these verses. You see, in 21st century Christianity, we tend to think that our church buildings should be built not necessarily dirt cheap, but somewhat frugally. We generally have a mentality we should not invest a lot of money in our church buildings. We see here in these verses that the Israelite mentality towards the tabernacle was very different. They put a lot of money and wealth into their tabernacle. And again, we'll come back to that in a minute. Verse 35. Moreover, he made the veil of blue and purple and scarlet material and fine twisted linen. He made it with cherubim, the work of a skillful workman. So here we read about the veil that they made. The purpose of the veil was to separate this tabernacle into 2 parts. The front part was known as the holy place. The back part was the Holy of Holies, and this veil separated those two parts. And we see that the veil was made out of quality material. It was also made by skillful workmen, and so a lot of time and effort went into making this veil. Verse 36, he made 4 pillars of acacia for it and overlaid them with gold, with their hooks of gold, and he cast 4 sockets of silver for them. So again, we see that there were pillars here to support the veil, and they were overlaid with gold. Verse 37, he made a screen for the doorway of the tent of blue and purple and scarlet material and fine twisted linen, the work of a weaver. And he made its 5 pillars with their hooks, and he overlaid their tops and their bands with gold, but their 5 sockets were of bronze. So again, as we read through these verses, we see that the Israelites put a lot of wealth into building this tabernacle. They also put a lot of time and skill into building this tabernacle. Now, as I mentioned a little bit ago, in 21st century Christianity, we tend to have a mentality that our church buildings should be somewhat cheap and frugal. The way we justify that, or our reason for doing that, is we say there's better uses for that money. We could use that money for missions, or we can use that money to give it to the poor. And those are certainly valid considerations. But I think we also need to do some serious soul searching and ponder whether there's not something else going on here. And let me approach it this way. We see that the Israelites put a lot of money into their tabernacle. What does it tell you about a group of people who are willing to invest that much money in a structure that is designed for their God? Well, I think it tells you that they value their God. It tells you that they have a very high opinion of their God. It tells you that they think their God is worthy and worth all the money they invest in that structure. And so at some point, we as 21st century Christians have to ask what our frugal mentality of church buildings tells us about our attitude towards God. Do our church buildings really reflect that we have somewhat of a low opinion of God? Does it reflect that we don't think God is worth an investment of significant amounts of money to build a building for Him? Another way to think about this is, we as Christians serve the one and only true God. We serve the Creator of the universe. If anyone or anything is worth having an expensive building, it is our God. It is the Creator of the universe. And so at some point we have to ponder and ask ourselves, what do our church buildings tell us about our mentality towards God, our attitude towards God? We claim that we build cheap buildings because we want to use that money for something else. But do we use that money for something else? Or is the reality that our church buildings reflect a low opinion and a poor attitude towards God? If you haven't joined my email list yet, please do so. First of all, it is free. By signing up, you get immediate access to all my free content. It'll be delivered right to your email inbox. This is the best way to make sure you don't miss out on any of my free content. In order to sign up, go to BibleMountain.com, click on follow. There will be a place there to enter your email address. Once again, thank you for watching BibleMountain.com.